Now, right now, if you go online, you can find job postings for a lot of startups, and that can seem really exciting. But if you've never worked in a startup before, there are probably some things that you need to know. In today's video, I'm going to cover 6 things that you need to be prepared to deal with if you actually want to work for a startup. So we'll discover in this video if it is right for you, or maybe if you should pass on that next opportunity. Let's go. Now, the first thing you need to be prepared to deal with if you're going to interview and maybe get hired with a startup is you need to be prepared to wear multiple hats. If you are the type of person who likes a very clearly defined role, well, you'll be doing the same A, B, and C things every single day, and you have absolute clarity, well, you're not going to get that at a lot of startups. And a lot of startups, that job description might change depending on what is going on. One week it could be one thing, the next week it could be another thing. They might have systems in place and they might decide to scrap that in favor of a new system, a new process. And if you're going to work there, well, then you need to be ready to adjust to that. And if you're not able to do that, well, it is not going to work for you. You're going to hate it and it's not going to be a good fit. So the first thing you need to be prepared to deal with is wearing multiple hats and what that might mean for you on a day-to-day basis. Now, the next thing that needs to be a really good fit is rapid growth has to be exciting to you. Okay, a lot of people want to go and do a job, right? And that job is, generally speaking, the same. They can be in that job, they can get ramped up to speed, and they can be relatively comfortable doing the same thing, being in the same role, and not having to learn a lot. But the reality is, startups often are boom or bust propositions, meaning it's not going to go well, bust, or boom, it is going to go very well, and it's going to grow. That might mean double or tripling in a single year, and if that happens, well, your job's probably going to change, and there's probably going to be growth, and the demands might change as that happens. So if you want to be in a place where you are relatively stable, same amount of employees year after year after year, same job year after year after year, well, that's probably not going to be a good place for you. One of the nice things at working with large established companies for a lot of people is that the systems are mature, they are top shelf, and they don't change, right? You work for a company, and let's just say you work in recruitment like myself, and they'll have an applicant tracking system. Well, at a well-established large company, they're probably going to have a pretty nice, mature, solid, well-tested, ready to go, turnkey system. Well, that might not be the case at a startup. At a startup, you need to be prepared to kind of fly by the seat of your pants. And they may not have a system for certain things that you're used to if you've worked for bigger companies in the past. And that's absolutely something you need to consider. So if you are interested in pursuing a startup, you need to be prepared to not have the best and brightest and newest from a system perspective. One of the things that you might need to deal with if you end up taking a job at the startup is there might be times where long hours are asked, demanded, or required. So if you're working at a company that isn't growing and they're pretty stable, unless you're in like a role with high seasonality, like, end of tax season for accountants, but most roles are pretty stable. Sure, there's some dips and peaks, but when you work for a startup, and maybe you're doing more with less, there are going to be times where there's probably increased demand for hours. And if that isn't going to work for you, if you're one of those people who's like, I like to be in at 9, I like to punch out at 5, and I don't like any disruption of that, well, being in a startup might not work for you because there is a ton of variability in terms of what they might need for you on a week-to-week basis, depending on what is going on with that startup. So that's something you need to take into consideration. Now, I know a lot of people where benefits are incredibly important to them. 401k, right? Their insurance, their tuition reimbursement, all those things are absolutely key. But the reality is, if you're working with a startup, some of those things aren't going to be, in place. Some of those things aren't going to be ready. Some of those things might be years away. They're going to need to succeed, grow, and establish precedents for these things. But if those are important to you right now, at this stage in your life, and you're like, okay, the things that are important to me, compensation, work-life balance, and benefits, well, then you might want to reconsider a startup. A startup, it's going to be hard to match the benefits of a seasoned, large company that's been around for a while. That's just the reality of it. Another thing that is really, really important is you need to have a high tolerance for risk. Startups are really exciting in the sense that you might come in on the ground floor, watch it blow up, and then you might be in a really high position because you came in with the company when it was early and you were part of building it and growing it. That's great. That's exciting. The other side of that coin, though, is it could all blow up. It could all go away. And you need to be okay with that. If you're at that season of your life where you're like, I want to roll the dice on something that could be massive, maybe that's exciting for you. But you might be in a stage of life where you're like, I need dependability. And this is something where I need this job to be here in 12 months, 18 months, and I can't risk that this thing might not work out. Well, then a startup might not be for you. Now look, I'm not trying to scare you off. If you want to pursue a startup, there are a lot of upsides to it too. I've done it in the past and my experience has been really, really positive. But have you ever been in an interview and a recruiter does try to scare you away? It actually happens a lot. And I'm not trying to do it, but it does happen, which is why I made this video here. Because I want to talk through why that happens and what they are trying to accomplish. Because believe me, this actually does happen. And there's a method to the madness, so I am done here, but I will see you over there.